Thank you so much, everyone. Chloe, thank you for moderating such a dynamic, thoughtful, and inspiring panel. That was really incredible. And as a professor who usually does most of the talking, it was a really nice change of pace to learn so much from so many people. I was scribbling notes the entire time and have just, I'm buzzing with thoughts and also inspiration from everything that was said. In particular, as you all touched on, mental health issues are often invisible. And so the fact that you are all willing to join us today and share your personal stories with everyone just speaks to your courage and I think the urgency for us to begin to address these issues and really think about the long term about what it means to be an athlete. And these are hard, challenging times, but it's moments like these where I feel so hopeful for the future, for young people coming up from different backgrounds who are looking at all of you as models and leaders in this space and who are hearing very, very different messages about what sports looks like, what training looks like, and ways that you're seeing people, as whole individuals throughout that process. And so thank you for sharing all of your work and experiences with us today. I'd like to pivot from personal journeys, your stories, to research and how people have been using other tools and frameworks and technologies to think about these issues in other ways. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for our next panel on the support and research panel, Louisa Thomas. Louisa is the author of Louisa, The Extraordinary Life of Mrs. Adams and Conscience, Two Soldiers, Two Pacifists, One Family, A Test of Will and Faith in World War I, and the co-author of Mind and Matter, A Life in Math and Football. Louisa is a staff writer at The New Yorker and a former writer and editor for Grantland. Her writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times, Vogue, and beyond. Her recent article, A Year That Changed How Athletes Think About Mental Health, was published in The New Yorker magazine on December 20th, 2021. Please check it out. It is an incredible piece. Please join me in welcoming Louisa Thomas.
Hi, thanks for having me and thanks for putting together this incredible panel. I've already learned a lot and looking forward to hearing from really exciting group of people today. I'm going to start by introducing them. I think once they're all up and then I will kick it off. But of course, I want our panelists to know that I'm here to moderate, but I hope this will be a really kind of a very kind of rich conversation. And if you have something to say, please feel free to respond directly to each other without waiting for a prompt from me, because I'm really interested in hearing about your voices, hearing your voices and about your research and experiences. So to introduce our panelists, we have Dr. William D. Parham, who is a professor of counseling and the interim director of the doctoral program in educational leadership for social justice at Loyola Marymount University. Dr. Parham serves as the inaugural director of the mental health and wellness program of the National Basketball Players Association. Dr. Parham is a licensed psychologist and a board certified in counseling psychology by the American Board of Professional Psychology. He is a past president of the Society of Counseling Psychology of the American Psychological Association, where he is also recognized as a fellow in Division 17, 45, and 47. Dr. Parham is a member of the International Think Tank on Mental Health and Wellness of Athletes. We also have Dr. Angel Brutus, who is the Associate Director of Mental Health Services at the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. She's a clinical psychologist, licensed professional counselor, certified mental performance consultant, and certified rehabilitation counseling and sports performance psychology. Dr. Brutus is a member of multiple committees within the Association for Applied Sports Psychology and currently chairs the Nominations Leadership Development Committee. Ivan Tchatchouwo is the founder and CEO of the student athlete wellness app, The Zone, whose mission is to improve student athlete well-being through mobile technology and data analytics. Ivan captained the men's basketball team at Concordia College, where he earned his undergraduate degree. Ivan holds a master's degree in applied physiology from Columbia University. Nzingha Prescod is a two-time Olympian and world champion in the sport of fencing. Nzingha was the first Black woman to win an individual medal at the Senior World Championships. She's a graduate of Stuyvesant High School and Columbia University, where she graduated with a degree in political science and a concentration in race and ethnicity. Nzingha is the founder and executive director of the Prescod Institute for Sport, Teamwork, and Education, also known as PIST. She serves on the USA Fencing Board of Directors and the USOPC's Council on Racial and Social Justice. She is the recipient of the U.S. Olympic Committee's Service and Hope Award. Nzingha is also a senior technology consultant at Ernst & Young. Daria Schneider is the head coach of the men's and women's fencing at Harvard University. During her athletic career, she was a 5-time national team member, 2-time world championship medalist, national champion, individual NCAA champion, and ranked as high as 13 in the world. She earned her undergraduate degree from Columbia University in Russian literature. Since retiring from the sport, Daria has captained Team USA fencing at the World Championships and Olympic Games. Daria is the youngest head coach in the Ivy League and has been twice voted Ivy League Coach of the Year. In addition to her roles with Harvard and USA Fencing, Daria serves on the board of directors of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. So as you can see, we have a really exciting group of panelists today. And I'm going to begin by asking Dr. Parham, who has a tremendous amount of experience working with a range of athletes coming from a range of conditions. And I'm wondering, what do we mean by mental health? How do you make distinctions between mental illness, mental health, and self-care? And can you help us come to some kind of working definition of what exactly mental health is?
Well, I'd be a millionaire if I could come up with the exact definition that everybody agreed on. But suffice it to say that most people, first of all, think of mental health and mental illness on a dichotomy, as a dichotomy. Either you have mental health or you have mental illness. You're either depressed or you're not. You're either anxious or you're not. And we like to actually advance the notion that mental health should be best viewed on a continuum, let's say from 1 to 10. There are many people who really float right into the 8 to 10 range, which suggests that they are pretty balanced, have a lot going on in their lives with their work, with their family, with their social aspect, with their spiritual nourishment, but all of it seems to be in sync. More importantly, they have a well-developed sense of agency, and I can do this. And importantly, they anticipate and feel able to manage risks that come down the pike. Then we have the sort of 4 to 6 folks in that mid-range who actually are doing pretty okay, but they have 1 or 2 challenges that are really occupying more time in their life and their space that they would like to, but nonetheless, they are negotiating that pretty successfully. Then we have those on the lower end of that continuum who are really struggling mightily, whose challenges, collective challenges, are really beginning to interfere pretty substantially in a lot of their domains of living. So their school, their family life, their relationships, their jobs, their faith-based practice. And so mental health and wellness really is sort of who you are and how you rev up at any particular moment in time. The other thing I'd like to say is that it's something that everybody has. There's not a human being who doesn't have a mental health. In fact, we go on record as saying we like to change the narrative and consider what people really have as mental wealth. And it's really helping them to discover the deposits that have already been made in their mental health and teach them how to access all of that. So it is part of everybody's life. It's a matter of how you use it. Some people have not been positioned early on to think that they have that agency and sense of confidence, and but they do, and it's a wonderful thing when that light bulb finally goes on and they discover that they can do okay.
Great. I think what Dr. Parham is saying underscores the importance of considering athletes individually, and I know that that's something that Dr. Brutus has really emphasized in her practice and her work with athletes, that the athlete is a stakeholder. And I was actually wondering if you could say a little bit more about what you mean by that and how it influences your own approach to athletes and mental health. Dr. Brutus.
Yeah, thank you for that. It really kind of emphasizes what Dr. Parham has mentioned in terms of that sense of agency, right? And so when you think about addressing concerns as it relates to mental health endorsements, that sense of agency is really important because it helps a person to recognize and appreciate just how much they bring to the table, and it helps to amplify the fortitude that's afforded to them as well. Oftentimes, when we think about the suffering that tends to happen, typically that suffering is tethered to a sense of hopelessness. But if there's an opportunity to provide a sense of hope in the midst of also providing access to information, access to resources, then it helps to turn that corner with regards to having those efficacy beliefs and having that sense of self-determination and having that sense of agency to be a ready participant in this thing called life that we're experiencing, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the situation or the context that's around us that might send messages otherwise. And I'm really looking forward to furthering this conversation, especially after hearing the first panel. And then one little thing that I do need to correct is that I am not a clinical psychologist. I'm licensed at the professional counselor level. I do have my doctorate in sport and performance psychology, but I always want to honor those who have paved the way in terms of actually pursuing their licensure in psychology.
My apologies. And Ivan, I know that your work in the kind of technological space pushes that idea a bit further by obviously athletes using an app are kind of literally in control of how they're interacting with this mental health, question and framework. And I was wondering if you could actually speak to how your experience with that has kind of furthered your own understanding as both as an athlete and as a person working in this space. And also if you could actually speak a little bit more about some of the challenges, because while I completely understand what Dr. Brutus is saying about, the athlete needing to have a lot of agency, obviously there are certain instances in which there's some kind of intervention required or some kind of help requested, and how you someone working basically through an app, which is faceless, can access those kinds of resources, or might even be resistant to them and clearly be in need of them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think when you think about it, right, our youth currently is trying to navigate through, what mental wellness and mental health means to them, right? At such an early stage, parents for the first time are parenting, this onslaught and push on mental well-being when they're seeing these numbers go up, right? So everybody's really trying to figure it out. Just kind of like to move backwards. I found myself in my dorm room when I got hurt, not going to classes, started to go down the substance abuse route, but I couldn't give you an answer to why, right? Because being raised in an African household and also being raised in the inner city, the education really wasn't there, and it was nobody's fault, so kind of getting that first aspect going, being diagnosed with clinical depression and an identity crisis by a sports psychologist that my school guided me to go to, was like the first time learning about it, right? And when I got educated on the thing, it was like, oh, that was actually a good thing, because I knew how to chart the ways to get better. And I realized going to talk to my teammates and my peers, being a captain, they wouldn't even step into that office, right? But I knew what they were going through. So within technology, we wanted to create a way. We seen, different services. We didn't want to exclude, right? But we knew 90% of athletes weren't going to have those conversations. So how do we, in an autonomous way, give them some coping mechanisms and give them the language to get to that step? So by the time they go speak to the likes of Dr. Parham and Dr. Brutus, they kind of have some sort of understanding of what's going on, right? And they can better talk to these topics, and then it can receive better help, right? So I think we're still in a phase of, it's hard to open up about it. It's hard to really discuss about it, but there's an understanding that something is up now. And instead of now just driving awareness, we want to try to create sustainability into what it means to become better, right? And that's a key word, because everybody's talking about awareness. But the next step is sustainability, right? And we challenge a lot of, our school partners to really think about the culture that they set. It's not just a technology that's going to solve this. It's the culture of well-being that's going to take the next step and help the youth athlete understand that there is an environment that cares about this, that caters to this, right? Which will dive into more people going to speak to the likes of, these professionals that are there to help them. So, yeah.
That actually speaks to my next question, which is there ever any danger or sense that, that the people that these athletes are working with are sort of like relieved to push it off on an app, like you have an app for that, or is there a sort of sense of do you have a kind of training where you are encouraging them to actually have like an open dialogue about, what they're doing? So it's not sort of like this private thing they're doing on the phone, or?
Yeah, no, I'll open up and I'll be very transparent about what's happened, right? I think in the landscape, when we've talked to a lot of the bigger universities, there's a fear that with the medical staff that technology is coming to replace them, right? And we have to do a good job of explaining to them, like, this is just coming to supplement, right? Schools are not going to be able to hire 20 different psychologists on the staff because it costs a lot, right? So how do you now create efficient technologies that'll give them data points to understand how to be more efficient with their time? Because they can't, if a school has on average 441 student athletes, 2 people can't manage that correctly, right? To get enough help out. So how do we now help them focus on the areas that they need to? But they're not trying to push it away. They're just trying to liberate their time and create more efficient process. And it's also the first time that schools are really investing in this because, we've talked about it in the past, but now, the kids, things are going up, right? The last 10 years, we've seen 56% increase in suicide rates in our youth. That's a problem, right? But how do we make sure that the environments are secure? So these schools are really trying to figure it out, and the medical staffs, they're starting to view technology as an aid versus, it's not going to be the answer. You still have to kind of get to the point of having these conversations live, but it's a step-by-step process if someone can't see help right away.
And you mentioned, growing up in a household where this kind of thing wasn't talking about, and obviously sports are famously a culture in which mental health challenges are shunned. And this question is for you, but also for Nzingha, about how you navigate, and honor the culture that you have grown up in and live with, while also kind of figuring out a path, to get the kind of help you need. And then also, I'd love to hear from Dr. Parham and Dr. Brutus about how you, as medical professionals, or people in the medical professional space, both make sure that athletes are getting the help they need while also, being respectful of the beliefs they're coming into it with.
I'll kick it off and I'll pass it off. My mom's watching, so I got to be careful. But they did a good job, and I think that my parents, I was born in Africa, right, and the culture there is very tough. I was a firstborn son. And there's a lot of things that I had to help teach, So now that I kind of came out with it, I remember my dad taking me to the doctor's office when we was trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And we was getting all these CAT scans and MRIs and nobody could figure out, right? But we had to have the dialogue on, what was actually happening. And through those conversations, it helped him understand what it was, and it took years, but it's just a different household.
Yeah. Nzingha, I know you have, and your organization is very attuned to, to integrating with the cultures that you're working with. Could you speak a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, I can talk about myself. And as an athlete, I think balancing that culture of like push, no matter at any cost, with like respecting your boundaries and your limitations as a person, and what you're comfortable with. That's something that I've had a lot of trouble with. I've had a lot of influences in terms of like who's encouraging me and who's like teaching me. So like my mom, I grew up in a Caribbean household. education is very much like the emphasis when I was growing up, but it was all with like love and respecting like my will, my autonomy, my agency. I came from the Peter Westbrook Foundation, so a lot of love and community there. And then Bucky, my coach, our Olympic coach, he was very like disciplinarian, you know, by the book, very strict, no talking, only work. And that evolved too as time went on. But I think what all these influences, like balance, seemed to be what was very helpful in promoting good mental health in myself through my career. At times, I feel like I've really prioritized being an achiever, getting things done, like maximizing my performance, like winning, whether it's in sport, academics, just doing the best I can. And I think as I get older, I'm realizing more and more, you get your achievement and then it's done, it's over, it's a moment. And I'm always proud of it, but I think what's been sobering is that people are important and relationships are important. At the end of the day, when I go home and I got my award, cool, and it's amazing and I love it, but people are what make you feel warm inside and like make you feel at home. And I think that's what we're all looking for. So at Peace, similar to PWF, it's very much Peter Westbrook Foundation, which is the club that Khalil's from, and where I grew up. Peter is amazing and like the leader of such like an amazing legacy of introducing fencing to the Black community in the inner city in New York. And we are planting seeds in my local community where I grew up in Flatbush, and really promoting that the sport, the discipline part, that's very much like a legacy of Bucky, but the community and like having people that you care about and support and uplift, and who do the same for you, and having that be like a mutual place where you can go and feel loved and like you belong. I think belonging is like another core part of mental health. But yeah, we try to create that environment for our kids. And I think something that's like a guiding principle is like performance is important, but also like doing your best and giving your best effort is even better than performance. And so we try to prioritize that with our kids and how we approach sport. The love is not dependent on performance. It's just being you and giving your best effort. So we try to, like what Dr. Parham and Dr. Brutus were saying about like access to resources, access to feeling like you have agency in your life, like having that education to, you know, execute on things you want. That's what we try to provide them with in a loving and caring environment. So it's a balance of like the discipline, the like work for what you want and like what you deserve, but also like it's okay to fail, pick yourself back up. You're resilient, you can do it, you can do anything. So.
Right. And I'd love to hear from Dr. Brutus. I mean, a lot of what Nzingha is saying about, you know, you work with athletes who are training themselves every day to push past their limits. Nzingha said, like you, and that's what we celebrate in sport a lot. You know, that's what makes, you know, what makes Olympians and elite athletes special in some ways. How do you separate the kind of appreciation for vulnerability and a willingness to sort of stop at your personal limits with a kind of understanding of what it takes sometimes to play through extreme pain or difficult circumstances?
Yeah, so it's a very nuanced art and balance to it all, right? Because on one hand, there is nurturing the well-being of the individual, and at the same time doing it in a manner that does not increase the likelihood of it becoming a detriment to their ability to perform at a high level, right? And so understanding that there are certain aspects of the elite level athlete persona and ability that if moved into any other domain would not necessarily be appropriate or acceptable, correct? So I think part of the process is really understanding the language of the athlete, understanding the values base and the core systems of the athlete, right? Just listening to the two of you speak about your upbringing and the cultures that you developed in, right? Getting a really good sense of what the messages are from those cultures the philosophies that you've developed over time in those respective cultures, because that's going to give hints and clues as a practitioner on where we start, right? As you are figuring out how to navigate this particular ecosystem, this particular environment that calls so much from you, right? And there's a lot of investment that goes into it. But the way you show up in these spaces and these places is really, it's really developed out of your earlier messaging, out of how you got there in the first place. And so how do we utilize that to not only maximize the experience, but also maximize it to a point to where you're thriving? And a lot of things that, Nzingha talked about is that striving mentality. Yes, high level sport requires a level of striving, but striving to what point? And to be able to have the language to put to the experiences, to be able to increase the literacy of our own individual language and how we show up, what our needs are when we notice those boundaries, right? They're not necessarily always going to be very hard boundaries. They might be some soft boundaries that help us ebb and flow, increasing our awareness of being able to navigate certain systems and certain spaces that then informs us on how we move is extremely important. And so I think in the work that we do at a very, tangential point is to be able to really understand all of the nuanced experiences of the athlete, how they're able to value what they bring to the environment, receive the messages from the environment, and figuring out how to make it all work so that at the end of the day, once the sport is done, as Nzingha has, alluded to, understanding that there's so much more of a robust opportunity and experience waiting for me, right? And so we know that there's an expiration date to this. And so I could go on and on about that, but I just wanted to appreciate what you two brought to the table and contributed to this conversation, because that's a very real thing. I even think about the conversation in the previous panel, understanding the development stages that the athlete is in, right? Because all of that helps to inform exactly what the entry point is in terms of the conversation, the increased awareness, the ability to sustain this work that we've been doing for so long, so that long after the sport experience is done, that this person is thriving in other environments and other spaces and doing it so untethering their worth and their value to the ability to strive and perform.
Daria, I was wondering as a coach, whether or not there ever is a sense of conflict between, the desire and even the requirement to get the most success out of your team with your, I'm going to assume good faith, caring and for their individual and holistic kind of well-being. Is that something, obviously it's very easy to say that the athlete comes first, but we all know in sport that that there are a lot of competing interests and a lot of pressure being placed on both the athlete and all the people around them, which incentivize them sometimes to overlook certain things. And I was wondering, in your experience as a coach, whether you come up against that and how you navigate that, and whether or not that's something you're ever aware of.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Louisa. And I am also very honored to be here. And it's been really great listening to the athlete panel. I've definitely have my brain bursting with new ideas just from listening to that first hour. And great to be on this panel with all of these incredible individuals as well. I would say I personally do not struggle with that balance because similar to Kira, I retired only in 2016. So I very recently myself was an athlete and saw a range of different behaviors and approaches by different coaches. And to be frank, wasn't even considering going into coaching myself, was encouraged by my partner to go into coaching. I had coached while I was an athlete for a long time as a means to help support my own fencing financially. And part of the reason I didn't think about going into coaching is because I hadn't seen models of coaches like the coach that I am now, I would say. Fencing, Khalil talked about it being very white. It's also a very male sport, a male dominated sport, especially at the refereeing and coaching level. And I just didn't see people who thought like me or looked like me in coaching in my sport. And so I definitely take a very holistic approach to my athletes. And I think the previous panel used the word empower, but I think specifically what I mean when I say I try to empower my student athletes is that I want them to have power in their relationship with me. I think it's very easy when you're an educator and you're in charge of students or athletes or really anyone who's younger than you and learning from you. It's very easy to, it's very comfortable to just hold on to all the power, not even realize how little power those in front of you have. You can forget really quickly once you have power what it's like to not have that power. And I both encourage my staff to give back as much power as we can reasonably give and still have a stable environment for our team, as well as do that myself, because I think that for us to have a really honest relationship, for people to feel comfortable coming to me about things, they have to feel like they have power in our relationship. It's very hard, especially when people are coming in as freshmen, to start to set the tone of that relationship, because they mostly haven't had that type of relationship with an educator or a coach previously. But we take the time in the beginning of the year to do that and to really think about what are they going through, what ways are we going to be able to connect with them, how are we going to get that message across. We do a lot of individual conversations, which again, the freshmen are extremely afraid of in the first time around. But then what's great is they really learn. It's part of our routine. So then they come in for their next conversation, whether that happens later in the fall or in the spring, and it's like, oh, I'm going in to talk to my coaches and tell them about my life and what's going on with me. And we really make it clear that we want to know, what do you do outside of fencing? What are you studying? What are your goals in your life? How many siblings do you have? Do you travel? How far do you have to travel when you go home for holiday break? Actually getting to understand some of their struggles and what they're dealing with. And then the other thing that I would say helps me not have as much of that conflict between performance and wellness, or really any, is that I want to be challenged by my student athletes. I think that the learning happens best when they're disagreeing and speaking up about things. And so I will often celebrate someone will say something and people are like, oh, feel like that was disrespectful or shouldn't have been said to the coach. And I'll engage with it and I'll be like, this is great. And we have a long conversation. And then at the end of it, I'll call that person out. Like, thank you so much for sharing that you totally disagreed with the coaches, or that you didn't like the drills that we were doing, because there's no way that they're going to get better if you don't tell us, like, you're experiencing this from a different perspective than us. But not only is it just as valid, in some situations it might even be more valid than our perspective, because we only exist because you're here. And that's something that I also say, like, both in my board seat with the USOPC, that I've said a lot as an athlete rep for fencing at different times, to athletes who are coming into that athlete representation position. Don't forget that the only reason everyone else in the room is here and exists is because of you. So never be afraid to speak up and share your opinion and share your voice, because we all wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So what we think, we might be older, we might have more experience, but it's not better experience necessarily. And we don't have a job if you're not in the room. So for all of those reasons, I personally do not struggle with that that balance. And in part, it's because I make sure my staff is going to call me out if I'm doing something that is questionable. So I want people around me saying, like, you're being too hard on this person for this reason. They've got X, Y, and Z going on, or whatever that might be. And we're always pushing people to be their best in general, not just their best in sport. And sport is almost a byproduct of people improving and getting better. Not for us, like Nzingha said, it's about community. It's about the people you come back to. And so we're not doing our jobs if we're not remembering that every day and reminding ourselves when we forget, and each other.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Parham, I was wondering if you could, just to go back to a little bit of what Nzingha and I were talking about a few could comment, as a practitioner and someone with a lot of research and years of expertise in this.
I think for the invitation to speak, and I got to tell you, in full disclosure, I was quite moved by what Ivan and Nzingha shared and disclosed. They reminded all of us that they need to be persons before performers. They really, what brings them out and illuminates their spirit is making them visible. I tell my students all the time, you can't take a U-Haul to heaven. So at the end of the day, what do all the medals and the monies mean if you can't really take it with you? But I also want to highlight some brilliance that I think is being overshadowed by their eloquence and their disclosure. I think it's important for the audience to understand what they go through in overcoming and in sharing their brilliance. Recently, we have COVID-19. We have the resurgence of racial hate. We have other markers of identity with class, culture, gender, sexual identity, persons with disabilities, faith-based. And more importantly, the world has responded in not so good ways to a lot of those markers. I'm also reminded of a classic study, the ACEs study, Center for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente. And essentially what they discovered, and I encourage the audience to review this, but the point I want to get to here and the piece that I want to focus on is that everybody in the audience, if you took out your mobile phone and randomly selected 100 people in your own phone, 100 randomly, the data are exceedingly clear that 65 out of 100 of those people would have had from 1 to 4 adverse childhood experiences, the earliest of which, not uncommonly, was first experienced prior to the age of 10. People are carrying around a lot of invisible tattoos of trauma and pain and are incentivized to not say anything about it. But therein lies the brilliance. If we are seeing the folks of Ivan and Nzingha and Naomi Saki, Simone Biles, and I can go on and on and on, showing GOAT performance, Hall of Fame performance, carrying around the mental health baggage that they are carrying around. It is sheer scary to fathom if they could have a place and a space to let some of that go, where they would be. So despite the abundant data relative to the race and distribution and disparities, there is a treasure in every trial. And finally, what they are reminding us is something I often share with my students. Wherever a shadow has been cast, it must mean that there's light nearby, because you can't cast a shadow without light. And the light about which I speak is hidden inside each of those athletes and is around the system of care that they embrace and that has embraced them. So I'm moved to give them a high five, a hug, and a fist bump, because I want everybody to see the true genius and special talent that that's really on display in this audience. I'm finished for now.
You said a lot that has prompted me to have a dozen thoughts. I'm actually going to mention 3 of them and put a pin in 2 of them because I'm hoping we're going to come back to them. You have mentioned, obviously, that we are in a current political and cultural climate, which is really inhospitable to a lot of people. And I was wondering if you and any of you, Ivan and Nzingha, from your experience, Dr. Brutus, from your experience, and also obviously through your research, Dr. Parham, could speak to the intersection of things like systemic racism and mental health, and how you, navigate a world in which, obviously we want to empower athletes, as Daria was talking about, but a lot of these kind of broader cultural currents are disempowering. There's nothing that one individual can do, to overcome or to end systemic racism, and that I know for a lot of people can make them feel disempowered, and they are in some sense disempowered. So that's one thing. And another thing that you mentioned that I want to come back to is this idea between, I'm coming at this, actually, I'm not an elite athlete. I am, when I was younger, though, I wanted to be a great writer. And there's a strong tradition of holding close your holding close your trauma in some sense, that that's the material, that's the kind of driving machinery of genius. There's studies on creativity and madness, things like that in literature. And I was wondering how you all have been able to come around to the idea, and whether or not there are athletes who sort of are scared of giving up some of that kind of hurt or chip on their shoulder or resentment or something, if they connect it to performance, because obviously a lot of times they do succeed to great degrees, while also harboring, these difficult, demons in some ways. And third, so we can come back to both of those questions, but I also wanted to ask Dr. Brutus about the kind of distinction between sports psychology and regular, like, clinical psychology. And traditionally from, an outsider's understanding, one is based on, like, how do you prepare your mind to perform your best? And the other one is talking about some of the kind of invisible tattoos that Dr. Parham just referenced, early life trauma and things like that, where sports psychology isn't normally associated with that kind of thing. And how do you what do you do when someone comes to you and says, I'm ready to see sports psychologists, and you realize that no, they need something more, a little bit more deeper? Or are those two things ever in conflict? A kind of mental health approach that is oriented around, on court or on field, or I'm actually not sure what a fencing runway is called, but in performance, success, with one that is maybe even destructive to success in some initial sense, because it can be destabilizing. So I just threw a lot at you, but I wanted to put a pin in the first two and see if we could start with the third. And then I just wanted to mention them because I really want to come back to both those topics.
So I'll make the answer to the third question as succinct as possible.
Okay.
And I think I'll describe it with regards to sharing a quick story. When you talk about the distinction between sports psychology or mental performance skills training or mental skills training, there's a number of different ways that you can kind of give it a derivative in comparison to your traditional clinical psychology, counseling in general, right? There's, like, again, going back to what Dr. Parham mentioned, it's a spectrum, right? It's a spectrum of wellness to illness and anywhere else in between. And it's not necessarily that it's either or, it's an ampersand. Right. So just making that abundantly clear. I'm working towards not saying think anymore and getting more into my feelings. So I'm going to say I believe. So I believe that the best way to educate the general public about the two, I think it really goes back to what the previous panel talked about, right? There were a lot of individuals who said that they had a sports psychologist at some point in their career. And then as they were transitioning, or because they were going through other things, they recognized they needed something more holistic, right? And so there are different practitioners at different training levels that can exclusively work on performance enhancement. And if at any given moment in time, one of the things that we try to emphasize is the necessity to, even if you're not the person who's providing the service, you should still at least have the education, understanding, and awareness of when it's appropriate to refer, or when it's appropriate to bring increased awareness to the individual you're working with. There might be something more that needs to be addressed. And then you have to also recognize that there's a timing in everything, right? And so the timing of addressing trauma in the midst of competition, what does that look like? Because we all know that trauma manifests in so many somatic ways that, again, it can have implications for the ability to perform. Not saying that one is more valuable than the other, but all of these things are necessary to take into consideration. Really quick story. Early on in my career, when I was making the transition from being a general practitioner, being a general clinician into the sport performance realm, I was in a practice for one particular sport, and there was an individual that I'd been working with at an individual one-on-one basis for a number of consecutive sessions. And so really got a chance to really understand their baseline, presentations, and endorsements. Sitting in practice one day, this individual, is bawling out of control. Like, they're getting all kinds of accolades from their coaching staff the entire time. But knowing what I know in terms of the clinical stuff and the baseline and all the work that we've been doing, I noticed that something was just not right. Right. But on the surface, from a performance standpoint, they're in their flow, they're in the zone. Right. But for me, I'm really honing in and I'm watching. And as practice kind of came to an end, this person's arousal levels were still extremely high. And in the midst of it, in a huddle, like the coaches are like, oh my God, that was like the greatest practice ever. Like you really hit all these marks and you did above and beyond. So this person is getting all the accolades in the world. And instantly they look at me across the court and they didn't even have to say a word. I was just like, I motioned for them to go to the side. So they removed themselves from the huddle. And the relationship that I had with that particular team, everybody knew like, hey, give space when space is due. Everybody else retreated. I was able to work with that athlete. They were having a panic attack and they had a dissociative moment in the midst of the ability to perform at a very high level. So I say that to say that it's important to recognize that the individuals who are providing these services need to be able to identify and recognize both areas to be able to make sure that you meet the needs of the individual that you're working with. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And that's just one of many examples. I'm sure Dr. Parham has plenty others as well. All right, so I'm going to stop so we can get to the other two questions, but I hope that helped to educate the audience a little bit more in terms of it's such a nuanced piece with regards to sports psychology and general clinical psychology and all the things that's in between.
I will add to Dr. Brutus saying, I'm actually have a strong point of view. In 40 years of practice, I've never seen an athlete come to me for sport performance where there wasn't a clinical piece to it. It's just, for me, it's not separate. I go a little bit rogue, according to some of my colleagues. If I were to ask the audience, have you ever felt like you lost confidence, motivation, self-esteem, my guess is everybody would raise their hand. I'm very clear. I go on record and say it's not humanly possible to lose confidence, motivation, or self-esteem at any time under any circumstance. They aren't using it, but it's not possible to lose it. I also want to say one correction for me. I don't know that it's impossible for me as a clinician or a professor or any service provider to empower an athlete. For me, and I'm taking ownership of this, that is the epitome of Eurocentric arrogance, to think that I have that power to build somebody's confidence. Both Ivan and Nzingha mentioned that they work hard to get better, to really distinguish themselves. And I understand fully what they are saying. If I were working with them, I would say, though, Ivan and Nzingha, are you working to get better? Or do you want to discover how better you already are? You see, when they finally have those light bulb moments of genius, they go, now I get it. For those of you in a room with a light now, if you cut the switch off, you're in the dark, you cut it back on, you're in the light. If I ask you, well, why is the light now on? You say, well, Dr. P cut the switch off. And I did, but that's not the right answer. Then you scratch your head and say, oh, I know what you're getting at. The electricity is working. And I say, well, yeah, that's true, but that's not the answer either. I said, in order for there to be true light in the room right now, the light bulb had to already be in the socket. Because if you took the light bulb out of the socket and you verified the electrical current and put the switch up, you still be in the dark. See, so for me, light bulb moments are evidence that those athletes are already pre-wired with that genius and talent. But again, we've been incentivized through society to not talk about it. And that's a whole separate take that I won't get into. But I do want to share this one thing, because I think part of empowering myself to really give athletes truth is to get them to change the narrative. The dominant belief, for example, is that the system of athletics, be it professional, Olympic, whatever, NCAA, has failed at addressing the mental health and wellness of their athletes. So now everybody's on the bandwagon to do that. I don't believe that for 1 minute. I believe those systems actually, and evidence will support this, that those systems have succeeded at not addressing the mental health and wellness of athletes. And when you begin to think about it in those ways, you start asking a list of different questions. Lastly, I'll say, and because of that, I really need you to see the illuminance that athletes in the form of Yvonne, Ivan, and Nzingha have shared, because those are sort of the invisible, structural, systemic issues that nobody talks about, but are nonetheless very real forces in their quest to discover how great they already are.
Maybe that can connect us back to my first question, because we're talking about systemic structural racism and things like that. And maybe this is a good question for the athletes, for Ivan and Nzingha, and Daria too, for coming at it from a different perspective. But how do you sort of negotiate, some of the kind of broader societal like injustices you see with a kind of obviously the individual experience you have had, and also the people you've worked with have had, and how do you sort of deal with the fact that we're not set up to really support the mental health of the individuals of so many people? That was redundant, but sorry. I think you understand the question.
I can start. I can take a go. I'll go back to like the mission of my program, Peace. This is in my deck, like when I present to people, I say this all the time, but I was one in my neighborhood who had access to like a high quality sport education, and not just a sport education, but high quality education, period. Public schools in New York, well known for being the most segregated in the country. There's underperforming schools everywhere that are just not addressed. And then like sports programs, there's, few and far between in a lot of neighborhoods where it's needed. And like these social emotional learning skills are needed, and like how to develop confidence and like put your effort in so you recognize your strength, like that, those productive structures, those structures that where you can learn productivity, learn how to, like I always say, like working hard, you have to learn how to work hard. Like that's something you develop. It's a muscle you develop. So I think that's part of like, in terms of like the systemic racism. And I think we've touched on like how that converts to mental health. I like what Dr. Parham was saying in the beginning about that spectrum of like, and the 8 to 10 ranges. You have agency, you have ability to manifest, you can realize your dreams, how to make things happen, you like to make your desires real, a reality. And I think when you don't have those tools, it majorly chips at your mental health. So I think all of those things like access, systemic racism contributes to mental health in that way. I went back to that because that's a deep concern for me. And I think sports are a great way to empower people and show them their power, like we've been saying, which is why I believe in the mission so much, and why I spend the time that I do with the kids. And I forgot the other parts of the question.
Oh no, I was just asking about how do you see mental health and these kind of broader social injustices and concerns intersecting, and how have you navigated them as an athlete and also as someone who's working with young people?
I would also say that I try to give the kids things I didn't have. Mm-hmm. So like I had to commute to the city an hour and 15 minutes there and back. That's like a huge burden. That was a huge burden in my life. For me, for my mom, I didn't live close to the train. So that's why it's so local, because I wanted to normalize it in their community, in our community. And then also, I think I had a hard time understanding my power early on in my life. And so like, I want them, I vocalize to them that you are capable, you are powerful. And something that I really want to get moving is like a mantra, like a creed that we have. And we've been talking about it with Sarah Taffel, who's on the call, and helps them build the program, and like a couple of other people involved. And it's something to reinforce to themselves that you are powerful, you're capable. And these are things I said to myself when I was a fencer. So like we've come up with, we are thinkers, we are leaders, we are fighters, we are fencers. So they know who they are and they can take that with them onto the strip and wherever else they go, so they don't have to learn it on the way. It's like, you already know that you're very capable from a young age. So that's something I care about. And I think in terms of like societal racism, I don't think that's normally presented as like the cool thing to do or like the appealing type of person to be. But I think in our program, we try to really plant that seed that you are this leader, you will be that leader. So when it does happen, don't be surprised. Because I think I've had to learn that on the way, and I wish I had learned that in the beginning.
It's a little bit like the light bulbs turning in, right? Like you're working on the wiring, and then when the light bulb gets
the wiring,
in,
right? Yeah. So like when they push themselves and they do something they didn't think they could do, I've had so many revelations where I'm like, oh, I didn't know I could do that, you know? So when they do those things, I'm like, see, you're so powerful. You can take that, even if it's we do this 5-minute run with the kids and it's like a challenge because they're young and they're like learning to be athletic and all that stuff. So when they do it, it's like, see, look what you did. It's like moving a mountain. And even though it's only 5 minutes to like, you know, a 30-year-old who's run, you know, a few miles at a time, it seems like 5 minutes, but like that's moving a mountain to them. Like moving a mountain to us is like starting a foundation. Like that's, you know, it's just as tough and takes just as much mental energy and mental discipline to exert yourself in that way. So making sure they recognize that you did something, you know, you push yourself, see, you can do it. No, you can do it again. Like embracing that challenge, embracing that mindset that you're very capable and you can do whatever you put your mind to. I love those light bulb moments, and it makes it really worth it.
I think that something Nzingha was talking about is how much we are willing to challenge the people that we are teaching or leading. But to turn that around, the power that our organizations and our structures have. And I even made a comment that, you know, when you have over 400 athletes, how are you going to have a provider for every single one? Well, why not? Why not have enough providers for every single person to have mental health? I think it's like, is there not the power for the people in those positions to make those changes? And if there was an organization that made those change, wouldn't we do the same thing Nzingha is doing for her students? See, you're so powerful. Look at what you did. Look at like what you're bringing to the future of our, you know, our country, right? Because I just think we could make those investments. We could spend the time. We could succeed at addressing mental health instead of succeeding at being terrible addressing it, or Dr. Parham said it much better than me, but instead we look and we encourage behind us maybe, or, you know, below us, like as far as who we're trying to raise up and bring along. But I think that, you know, what I am try to do in the position that I hold and try to, and I would say that I empower others to do the same, is to look towards who has that power to do those things and challenge them to do it. Why not provide enough? And it's not just athletes. Why not provide enough mental health care at schools that all students who need it can access it right away? Not like when they're in a big enough crisis that the school decides, okay, now you get to have access to this.
I'm going to give Dr. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Two things to that. You know, Daria, you bring up a great point, right? And it's funny, you know, having a lot of those conversations. Athletic programs will pay a college coach $10 million a year, right? When you have these conversations about this mental health, you know, they can't quantify the ROI in their head. So they make the mistake of thinking, you know, we'll wait. And when you're reactive, you think about what happened at Hawaii University. The football coach was just fired and they got 15 kids in the transfer portal, right? So if you want to think about it on the business end too, that's $35,000 a kid that you've invested that you're going to lose out, right? And then the PR aspect of parents now aren't going to trust you, student athletes aren't going to trust you to go there. So being reactive has a cost to it, right? So now, you know, think about it on the systematic side that you brought up, Louisa, right? I had to realize, you know, and I did this when seeing the sports psychologist, you know, I realized that I actually only played sports to fit into the communities, right? Me being an African kid, when I got here at the age of 6, I had to play basketball to get cool with my friends, right? And I just became good at it. So when I became good at it, I followed it on. And, I never really loved it. There's some people that love it, but I utilized it to kind of, not ostracize myself from the people that I was around, so within those scopes, I just ended up playing college basketball. I got lucky, I was actually pretty good. And when I got hurt, it was just like, wait, am I going to lose my friends? Am I going to be, too cool, like too smart, and they're not going to be cool with me? Like, those are the things that really wrapped out, right? Mm-hmm. Think about that. How many kids are actually strung along within that, right? They utilize the sport to fulfill their, to push away their traumas. But you only get 2 hours really a day to play that sport. So for 22 hours, you got to be a human, right? And I have friends, the communities that never stop playing basketball. Their fathers, they're leaders of their household, but they can't make a living because they're stuck up on that aspect of it. And we have real conversations about that. And it's just like, when you think about systematic aspects, those things is near and dear to me, because it's way bigger, right? It's way bigger. You think about the things that people are going through, teammates, and they can't say anything because they don't know what the next person is going to say, right? So I wrote a piece recently on how Black athletes can shine a light on speaking about mental health that will impact the communities, right? Because if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty, Jay-Z said something on the New York Times where a lot of fights happen in the Black communities by people just staring at each other. And it's because I think you see me when you're looking at me. So I correlate it with something that's like, we have beef now, right? And now something has to happen, where in retrospect, it's like, I'm just looking at you, right? So it's so many different aspects to it, and it's way deeper. So shine a light and having these conversations, especially, us coming from these communities, will allow the younger generation to know it's okay. It's okay to speak about it. It's okay for DeMar DeRozan to say he's depressed, and we can now have that conversation, right? So yeah, that's a bit about to answer that first question.
That's awesome. And this is painful for me because I want to keep talking and I want to hear what Dr. Brutus has to say. And I'm actually hoping there's a Q&A at 1:30 where I'm hoping we can sort of pick up. It's now actually the keynote time, and I don't want to run into her speech. So I'm gonna call it a day for now, but I'm really hoping that in 30 minutes we can, I'm gonna throw my first question to Dr. Brutus, and I'm hoping to hear more from all of you then too.